No, stop trying to get me to live stream.
Again.
One of these days, I am going to do it. And then, like I said, the internet will be sorry. We will accidentally live stream.
Little oops.
Yeah. Oops. Oh. Or the worst will be if you do that and then you forget and I just go back working.
I know.
You know what I mean? You have that horrible face while you're like
dialing the world.
The like mouth open, like slack jawed look while I'm like working away, and people maybe, hey, never know. Maybe people want to see how work gets done.
Deep breath. Welcome to Modem Futura, Sean.
Hey, welcome. Good to be back.
Yes, it is. Yes, because you've been traveling.
Yeah, had a little bit of a break. I do want to talk about that, but first, I have to know.
Yes.
Have you watched any episodes of Severance?
No, not yet.
Okay, so definitively my campaign efforts were a swing and a miss.
We'll get there. We'll get there. It's on the list.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's good because as soon as you watch it, you have to text me or whatever and let me know because I am curious. And
but it's a lot to get through. How many hours of the first season do I have to get through before I get to the second season?
It's either 8 or I don't even know. Is it 8? It's 8 or 10 episodes, right?
It's a lot.
So you got a good solid 10 hours, and then that's per season. So you got to, you got some big flights coming up, perhaps, in the near term, right, summer break and
loaded up on one of those sort of transatlantic flights.
That's right.
Trans-Pacific flights.
Yeah, you can get through, a lot there.
Because I've got nothing else to do.
That's, I will say though, there used to be, now, when you get on these flights, they all have Wi-Fi, right?
Yeah. When you can pay for it, yes.
You can pay for it. Or sometimes they'll give you like the free tier. So like certain messaging apps and things like that. I've been traveling a bit over the last month, and I've actually found it quite useful. Yeah. However, I used to rely on like when I'm flying, you're like, that is like
I know, downtime, personal time. Yes.
You're like all these shows or these movies, I used to queue them up so that exactly that. You're like, I can watch these with guilt-free because I can't be checking my email right now. I can't be doing these things. And now they're kind of ruining that.
But I go back and forth. So I love that idea that you've got sort of 10 hours, 12 hours of just personal time when you can read, you can sleep, you can watch movies, no guilt involved whatsoever. So that to me is precious. But there are some flights when I work because I need to. And I actually really enjoy it. You get in a flow state. You're sitting there writing a document on a long flight and you suddenly realize several hours have gone.
Yeah, that's true.
And it makes the flight go incredibly fast.
That is true. That is true.
Assuming you're in a decent seat and you don't have the person in front of you crunching your laptop up. So you're sort of, if you could see the video, you're sort of crunched up like this, desperately trying to see.
Your fingers in like the clamshell, right? Like, it's like your knuckles are hitting your screen practically.
Right.
No, can I admit something kind of embarrassing?
Go on.
So one flight, I took the Apple Vision Pro.
Yes.
And I was that.
You were that person.
I have to admit, it's a little embarrassing. But I wanted to try it. It was for science.
Right.
It's for science.
You sacrificed yourself, Sean.
That's right. Well, and it's a lot to bring along because to be honest, the biggest issue was how cumbersome. When I travel, I like to go as light as possible because there's just by the nature of it, your bag is filled with laptops and chargers and this and that and whatever. So then it was like, all right, let me wedge this, Apple Vision Pro case in there. It was pretty cool because the way I was using it was, I used it for some entertainment elements, which is pretty cool. Because although I will say it's a little strange on a plane. Now you can control this with the Vision Pro. You can control how much of your field of view you can see versus not. Yeah. But when I was flying, a transatlantic flight going from the US over to Europe, that's like the night flight or whatever. So they shut off all the cabin lights. These things all use positional tracking for your hands, which don't work very well in the cabin's dark. So anyway, so it's a little weird. But what it ended up doing was I had my laptop open on like the little tray. With the lid at like a 45 degree angle because I wasn't used because I was connected.
Okay, yes, you actually had the screen of your laptop in the Vision Pro.
And so I literally was creating, editing, refining, and adding all the touches to a presentation I was giving.
Right.
But it was wonderful because I had this massive screen. I had my music going. I had stuff, whatever.
And the screen is just so big. I forget how many screen equivalents it is. It's something like sort of 5x2 screen array.
It was massive. Basically, it was the equivalent of as like the largest desktop setup you could have possibly imagined.
Yep.
In row 24G or whatever it was.
Right.
But I was also very lucky because on that flight, my row was empty.
Okay.
So it was like, I was like, this is the best time to try this because I didn't have someone right next to me going, who's this weirdo with this toaster on his face?
You weren't flailing your hands out with the people on the side of you.
But there were a couple times I was startled by it because, somebody had come by with like drinks or something and they like tap your shoulder and I'm in this thing. I'm like,
who is that?
I'm like flow state here. And they can't tell that I'm listening to music. I can't hear a thing. I had like noise canceling headphones and all this kind of stuff. So I'm in like flow state. I'm like, this presentation is going to be amazing. And then someone touches your shoulder and it was like, it was a very abrupt return to reality.
Right.
But it was cool. I mean, the other thing that was a little different, and I for science, I will do it again. I have another flight coming up as soon, which I will take it again because I want to try it because the only thing I found a little off is when you're in this kind of transportation, there's a mode in there because obviously you're moving and jostling with the plane or the train, if it may be. And they have like a travel mode to basically, I assume, so the device doesn't go crazy trying to figure out where the hell it is.
Yeah,
right?
As you're joggling up and down and moving, it stays a little bit more static.
And I got a little bit of eye strain with that, which I don't normally get because I can stay in, it's like, scuba dive times. Like I can stay down in the VR headset for, quite a while.
Right.
But I did notice that little eye strain. So I need to try it again and to see if that was just because also of just the environment and things or.
But good on you. I haven't had the guts to sit there with this thing on my head.
Yeah.
While everybody else around me is looking at me.
And again, I had the luxury, the flight was it was a long flight. It was like 11 hours.
Yeah.
The flight was relatively open, or empty, I guess, which was nice. But I was a little surprised. Not a single person said anything.
Right.
I was expecting, kind of.
Because they're all sitting there thinking, who's that fool? Giving you side eyes.
What I don't know is if people were taking pictures because I had, but it was one of those things where it was both this like hope and fear that someone would ask me about it. Right. Because I'm like, I really don't want someone to ask me about it, but also I do.
Now nobody cares.
And that's it. And so you're just like, there's just an acceptance for just being a little weird.
There we are. Yes.
And so that was, so I'm going to try it again because it'll be interesting to see. I want to do it more than once.
So next time you do it, you've missed a trick here.
Yeah.
You need the Modem Futura logo on the front of it.
That's a good idea. We need to get like a decal to put that bad boy.
And actually, you need a little bit above it saying broadcasting live.
That's now you've given me something to go with there. Also because it has like the creepy eyes on the front.
Right.
And I wonder if there's a way we could do that.
Actually, put a couple of goggle eyes on as well.
Just peeks through it. Oh my goodness! Can you tell it's the end of the semester? We're getting punchy. But this is what we're here for.
Yes,
I love it.
Yeah. We should probably start the show.
We can. Yeah, we'll start the show because I've got a fun shout out. But we'll go. Why don't we'll pause? We'll roll the credits at this point to get us going, and then I'll give a quick shout out.
Okay.
Initializing waveform.
Modulating signals for transmission.
Exploring the possible, probable, and preferable futures.
Welcome to Modem Futura. All right. All right. Well, if you've landed the plane with us, right? Welcome to Modem Futura. Right. This is the podcast that explores the intersection of technology, society, and the possible, probable, and preferable futures, asking deep questions like what will it mean to be human in the future. I'm Sean Leahy, and joined by my seatmate in row 42G.
Right, Andrew Maynard.
And that means we're taking this plane wherever we want to today.
As far as we can take this metaphor before it crashes.
I can feel it already.
Right.
I've already stretched it to its limit. Yeah. But okay, so real quick, I did mention I want a special shout out.
Yes.
Today, and I thought we can start a new segment if we want. A little listener mail. perhaps something like that. We've said it before. We'll say it again. Please do reach out to us. We love hearing from people. But I want to give a big shout out to Isabel from Switzerland. She's a cardiac. Wow, that is a tough word for me to say all of a sudden.
Yes.
A cardiac, so heart.
Right.
Surgeon.
She does stuff with the heart.
Wow, but it's not a brain surgeon. I think I might need some help right now. A cardiac surgeon in training living in Zurich.
Yep.
And I just want to share just a brief little bit from her note. So I asked, she gave me permission. She writes, I hope this message finds you well. I want to take a moment and reach out to you from Zurich. I have been listening to your podcast on Spotify since the very first episode. Hearing your voices makes me feel at home. It's like you speak the same language, share the same humor, and embody the same mentality that I resonate with. I often finding myself laughing along with you, and I can see so many parallels between your thoughts and mine. So just want to say a massive heartfelt thank you to Isabel for reaching out and just sharing that kind of stuff.
You know, it makes you feel good. There's at least one person out there listening, but I think that's really nice. Yeah.
And someone perhaps by the sound of it, just as crazy to get on our flight too. I don't know. We're now boarding. But in all seriousness, I mean, messages like this,
they mean a lot.
They're so meaningful. Yeah. I mean, it gets right at to the heart of why we do this show and why we have these kind of venues where we put these topics and ideas out there into the public to exactly do this, get people excited, to find community around these things. Just I would kind of also just throw a call to action to the rest of our listeners. If you want to be like Isabel and get a shout out, send us a note, email us. You can do this many ways. You can email us at hello@modemfutura.com or leave us a review. You can find us on LinkedIn. All of our contact information is in the show notes of every episode. So regardless of where or how you listen, if you click that little extra button to get to the show notes, you can find all of Andrew and I, our contact information. And just additionally, I think every so often, I don't do this every week. I don't do this every day, not every hour. I like to check some of the just our reach statistics, which I think is nice.
Yes.
I think I had shared, I think it was back in December. It
was a while back, yes.
Yeah, that because we had reached this milestone of we had reached 60 countries. New update, we're up to 74.
Right.
Which is incredibly encouraging to see. And you just see this list and you're just like, it's amazing to see where people are.
How far the reach goes, yes.
Yeah, how far, just from... At this point, almost every corner of the globe, there's
think about it. There are people in that many countries who actually want to listen to you, Sean.
On purpose.
My mind is blown.
Now, there's no guarantee it was on purpose, right. But either way, I'm taking it. But also and again, for, I think if Modem Futura resonates with you, we'd love your support. It's been amazing to see the growth of the show and to get the warmth and the support from our audience. It's been just tremendous. I think it would be cool if we could crack like the Apple podcast or Spotify, like the top 10.
Oh, yes.
I want to set my expectations so high.
So what does that mean exactly? I presumably you mean when somebody sort of searches for a podcast like this, a podcast about the future and tech, it appears in those first 10 search results.
Yeah, that would be amazing because
how does that happen?
Well, I'll tell you how it happens.
Okay.
Well, one, there's stuff on our end. We have to produce good content, right? So that's on us. But the other way that we can really rise in those rankings is really through reviews.
Yes.
So one, there's obviously the discovery. So sharing. So if you do, again, if the show resonates, please help us share it. Find people who you might think are interested in the type of content we cover, the way we cover it, that kind of stuff. But also leaving reviews, which I know is that's really hard to get people over that hump of like, I like listening, but am I going to go to that? Because it's not always clear how to do it.
Yeah.
But depending on whether you're on Spotify or Apple Music or Apple Podcasts rather, you can essentially scroll usually way to the bottom and there's a way to say like, leave a review. But that's really important because Apple and other directories like Spotify use those in their ranking for discovery. So what that means is that exactly as someone's typing, I'm curious about futures.
That's where we pop up. Yes.
The more we get sort of that ratings sort of built up and padded in there, the more people will be able to discover us because basically we get ranked higher in these returns for these searches. And so I think it would be. I mean, that's a big ask.
It's a huge ask, but it will be lovely. I mean, even just sort of clicking that star rating. And that's even faster. You just sort of click the star.
Just click the star. You don't even have to type words.
Yes.
If It's just, hey, stars are cool. But also, in there, like I said, reach out to us, leave us a note in there. Let us know what's up. Where are you from? What are you thinking about? All that kind of stuff. And we'll because we do read them.
Yes.
We read every single one of them. And so, so a ton of fun. Cool.
Okay.
All right. Or should we divert this plane?
So we have this travel theme,
yes.
and actually one of the things we wanted to talk about was where you've just come back from.
Yes. So I'm just back from a trip to Portugal.
Yes.
I was in Lisbon for
such a hard life.
Oh, I know. And especially this time of year too. I mean, it's sunny. Well, I did get rained on quite heavily at one point, but it's beautiful. And it's not hot. So it's like is a beautiful time of year to visit Portugal in general. But I was in Lisbon for a conference called Future Days, which is the second year that this particular conference was there. I had a lovely time. The conference itself, if you're interested, it's futuredays.io. You can go look it up. I hope and presume there will be a third year of that next year. But essentially it's positioned as this transformational think tank, a platform and community to help imagine and shape more positive futures.
Okay.
This particular year, their theme was on symbiotic futures. So really kind of through all these different, talks and workshops and experiences, really sort of looking at how do we do and create positive futures, but in a symbiotic relationship.
Yes,
and the beautiful thing about that is, of course, people took that and ran with that in terms of what that meant to them.
I can imagine. Yeah. Yes, lots of different ways of interpreting it.
Yeah,
and so I'm sort of imagining a sort of a science fiction beast inside you. So just probably not what you were thinking about.
Well, it's maybe right. that is a future.
Yes.
But I mean, it was absolutely beautiful too. I mean, the venue was amazing. It was in this like covered. So think of like almost like a botanical garden, but covered.
Yes.
So it's just beautiful. So we're in this space that was very much
a greenhouse.
Yeah, basically,
right.
but only covering on the top, so it wasn't stiflingly humid and awful.
I'm with you. No, that makes a lot more sense. I was imagining you all sort of cramped in this little greenhouse.
I couldn't handle it. I think my longest time in a greenhouse is like 5 minutes because it gets so sweltery and sweaty. I can't take it. Yeah. But it's amazing. So you're in this backdrop of this nature and green everywhere while talking about a symbiotic futures. It was really quite powerful. Yeah. And a really interesting mix too of I would say more traditional practitioners doing strategic foresight and more traditional futures things, along with lots of really interesting designers and people bringing some concepts that I think are often not traditionally part of some of those conversations, which was really cool. But again, it was a wonderful time. Had lots of great conversations. Met lots of new colleagues from around the world. Also some big players there. The UK Ministry of Justice, the UN Futures Lab, Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies. They were all there as well.
And this is, we were talking about this earlier in the week. This is what really grabbed me, that this is a big area. Yeah. There are people studying futures. There are people practicing in the area of futures. There are jobs there. There are companies investing in it.
Yeah. And I think one of the things for me that was really such a valuable eye-opener too. Well, I should say, back up and say in general, I'm going to paint with a massive brush here, right? Futures and foresight work is much more prevalent in Europe more broadly than it is in the United States. Yeah. It's growing, but it's I was reminded of that when there also to see the level of people engaging in futures that didn't necessarily have a title that had anything to do with futures.
Very interesting.
Right? Or foresight.
Yes. So what sort of titles?
It was a random mix, right? So you have people who are designers. You had C-suite individuals, chief information officers or CEOs of like small community organizations. So there was a really rich representation across industry, which was cool. Lots of nonprofit. Small companies, design firms, larger company. I mentioned some of these sort of like larger organizations as well. And it was really fascinating. But also again, it's kind of woven in this rich to kind of have a lot of these conversations just kind of bubble up. And it, I signed up. I don't normally join like WhatsApp
right.
chains, and I did, and I have to admit, it was a little overwhelming for someone who's, I usually watch things before I participate, but again, even there, just the richness of that community was really striking,
right.
to see, which was really cool.
Yeah.
So, I think next year, I think we both need to go to Lisbon.
Okay, this feels like, definitely both go to Lisbon. This feels like a very Modem Futura sort of thing.
I think so. And like I said, it resonated very well, and had lots of great conversations. I was handing out, we've got these cool little postcards. I was handing those out. And even after the fact, discovered that there was people that were fans of the show that were there that I didn't get a chance to meet.
Yes.
And I think I'm probably more disappointed than they are. I'm waiting for that airport, someone to recognize me.
One day.
One day.
Yeah. So then what were some of the big takeaways from this?
Yeah.
And what is happening in the futures world?
Well, I say, I will, before I even get there.
Yeah.
So one of the things, let's see, this podcast will air 2 weeks. So beginning of May. So basically the last week of April, beginning of May is when this conference took place. The Monday that my flight was leaving was the Monday that Spain, Portugal, and parts of southern France all went dark.
Right.
With this massive power grid blackout.
Yep.
Thankfully, it was, in some ways, I guess depends how you look at it, but thankfully it was essentially, it's been deemed, as far as I know, a natural occurrence. It's one of these like nightmare scenarios for power engineers, but
That's
it was
everything goes wrong.
Yeah, but there wasn't something. Nobody did something.
Okay,
it was this just horrible. It's those events where you're like, it's possible, but it probably won't happen. And
right.
You go.
Yep.
But it was crazy. So when I left,
this is leaving the States.
I was leaving the US, leaving Phoenix. My phone is blowing up with travel alerts from, because, all these things,
I know as part of the universe, you get these things saying, travel alert, do not go to this country.
Yes. Yeah, and that's what I was getting. I'm literally getting all these red flags and everything. And it's like, warning, but it was crazy because I'm sitting there going, okay, I'm like, well, my flight's still going to go.
Yep.
Because my flight path was to Paris and then to Lisbon. But I'm like, there's a really good chance. Like, I don't know what will happen if I leave because the entire, like everything there was no power at all.
Right,
it wasn't like one of these things where it was like, oh, there's like a little blackout for an hour. The entire, for example, Lisbon was completely without power for like 12 hours or something to that nature.
Yep.
Before the little part started coming back on. So I'm getting on this plane going, I don't know what's going to happen. This is going to be wild. You managed to get there by the time I landed, because the way that the travel is, you land the next day.
Yes.
So I arrived Tuesday morning, and by that time the power had been fully restored, which was cool, which was great for me. The airport was chaos, and getting there was chaos.
Right.
But right away, so even just personally, I'm having all of these sort of questions and doubts. And I think I've shared a little bit of this before. I think I shared a story once my credit card got turned off. But suddenly you realize, I'm like, okay, I'm flying internationally. I'm going to land in a place where I'm reliant on the airport to facilitate me getting there.
Yep.
I have a virtual reservation at a hotel.
Yes.
I have plans to take an Uber through an app to get to said hotel.
Right.
And I'm going, I don't know what to expect.
If the systems are down,
there's
how
nothing
on earth
there.
do you do anything? Yes.
And during that, again, for me, I arrived, it was back on.
Yep.
But during that whole day, that Monday, none of that was available.
Yeah.
It was, and then the photos coming, you see the airport in complete pitch dark blackness.
Yes. Yep.
Just wild scenes.
Yeah.
And that theme, it was kind of, in some ways, this serendipitous a moment to have a futures conference.
See, that's what I was thinking.
Starting, because it officially started on like the Wednesday.
Okay, yes,
so 2 days after this massive regional Iberian Peninsula blackout, it was, in some ways you couldn't have timed a better a catalyst for these conversations.
But the thing that gets me, and I'm talking about the link with futures, is it shows just how precarious our systems are. So we've seen this over the years. There have been a number of really big blackouts, both in the US, in Europe, and other places. And almost always they're the result of incredibly complex systems.
Yeah.
So, for instance, there was one that I wrote about a few years ago. I think this is one of the ones in India where you could trace it back to a stick that fell across a line. And there was a cascading series of events that just put a massive amount of the country into darkness.
Yeah.
And you begin to realize that the more complex these systems are, the more vulnerable they are to these things that you would never imagine would knock them out. But you just can't control for that. And then you put humans in the system. And this is, to me, where it gets really interesting thinking about futures and complex technologies, because it's not just the technology, it's their interface, intersection with human behavior. So humans are complex anyway. We do weird things, unexpected things. And you put those together with weird, unexpected technologies. And it gets incredibly hard to predict where things are going to go.
Yeah, no, completely. And it's wild too. And also, I mean, so again, this idea, right? The theme of this conference was symbiotic futures, right? And then, but very quickly you realize the fragility of these complex systems where you're like, and then very quickly it becomes this problem of, wait a minute, like for me to go about my daily, like we can think about blackouts in a room. You might think, oh, well, what a great opportunity to go read a book or whatever. You're like, but only outside, only during a few hours, or by candlelight. And who has? I mean, maybe a lot of people do, but I'm like, I don't think I even have any candles in my house.
You mean in your backpack you didn't have that candle?
I didn't have a candle.
Come on, Sean, you need to be a better traveler than this.
Like, hey, when
you waterproof matches.
When you've got an Apple Vision Pro taking up half your backpack, you don't have room for candles.
That's
and
what you sacrifice. The emergency kit.
That went out the window, and I've got a VR augmented reality headset,
which also wouldn't work.
No, or you're very well. I did buy right before, because luckily I bought a big power bank for my backpack.
Yeah.
But again, very quickly, under this framing of the symbiotic relationship, is at all these different levels, which was beautiful to take it through any which way you want.
Yeah.
But right away, you're like, I can't buy food.
Yep.
Because you're relying on a vendor, for example. So even while I was in Lisbon, for example, you go into a lot of grocery stores, and like many, there's one cashier or till that has a human at it. The rest are all automated, do-it-yourself kind of deals. None of that works. None of these things, even without power, how do they even act? So it's like vendors couldn't even sell you goods, even if you had cash, which, who carries cash? Right. I mean, I don't.
Yep.
And so you just very quickly, you're brought face to face with the fragility of how much we rely on to just be there.
Yep.
And then when you add this complexity of these systems, the threat of it just going away, and then what?
Yeah.
You really are left in a real space of vulnerability. And if you're there, if this happens where you live, chances are you have provisions. And if it's short term, you've got backups.
Yeah.
But I was thinking too, like as we continue to have an increasingly global sort of like, I will say like, I shouldn't say workforce, but I just mean people, traveling and moving and stuff. Like when you're on the move and these things happen, you are really sort of stuck because you don't have a place to live or sleep or rest. Everything is based on transaction.
Yeah. Yeah.
And suddenly you can find yourself in a position where you have none.
Yeah. Of course. So one thing that really interests me about any conversation like this is looking at it through a Western lens. So we're sitting here in the US, you're traveling. It looks awful. And yet the reality is there are countries and people and populations that actually have to deal with this sort of stuff every day.
Yeah.
And it's actually sort of part of this, we use the term jagged edge, but it's the jagged edge of society in the future, where in some places we really seem to benefit from emerging technologies and technological systems until they go away. In other places, they don't have that luxury, but it makes you wonder whether they're more resilient as a result.
Yeah. Well, I remember this was, I'm trying to think, this was 2007. I think I was in India for a while doing some stuff, and where we were in that particular part of India, every day, it was almost predictable. It was like in the afternoon, so I had, this is a different life, but I had tons of cameras with me. We're doing all these video production things, and you just prepare for it. And you're like, okay, it's going to come. We don't know exactly when, but we know we're going to have a power brownout is going to kind of ripple through. And sure enough, everything goes dark and everyone knows what to do and they just carry on doing things. Well, and it was interesting too. So some of the conversations I was having with people who were local to that, like Iberian, in Spain and in Portugal, some of them loved it.
Okay.
They were like, this was amazing. This was the break we all needed from the digital distractions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they're like, and then right afterwards, of course, there's a little bit of irony here, is like right after, social media is flooded with all the videos and pictures from people not being able to share these things.
Right. Yes.
But it was suddenly this very intense resurgence to community. Right, people coming out of like apartment buildings, sharing supplies,
right? Yes,
playing, bringing a guitar.
But isn't it funny? So we saw this in COVID as well. Slightly different situation, but for some people, that's that freedom from technology, from the pressures of everyday life, is liberating.
Yeah,
and yet how quickly we fall back into old habits. And I wonder how you square the circle here with people saying, "This is amazing. I feel free." And then they trap themselves again as soon as those technologies are available again.
Yeah, well, because I think it's an interesting thing, because I was thinking about this a lot, because one of the gentlemen I was talking to was like, we should have this once a month, like just
but once a month failure.
But the key, it's like a detox,
we can make that
right?
happen.
Like this, the fads of doing detox.
So you can imagine you've got sort of 10 buttons spread throughout society, and a random person has the ability to press the button.
But I think that's one of the pieces, is it has to be out of your control.
That's it. Yes.
Because if it is in your control, then it's a decision to do that. Yes. And I think that's much harder for people to do, especially at that scale.
Yes.
But when it's taken away, when it's like, oopsies, a stick fell over on the transformer and whatever.
Maybe this is the answer to future angst, sort of having this random ability for somebody to say, switch the internet off.
Yeah, or like a random, build in some kind of random thing where it's like a lottery, like it's going to happen, and when it happens, this is going to be an blackout. Intentional
AI tool. So we get all worked up about the fragility of relying on AI systems.
Yeah.
But maybe this is a blessing in disguise. Maybe we need a little algorithm which has got a little bit of Loki in it. So every now and again, it just shuts some system down randomly.
My God,
just to remind us about our humanity.
I love a Loki AI. Oh my goodness, we need to reserve that domain name or something real quick.
Right, LokiAI.com.
Yeah, it's ours. Please don't take it. Or if you take it and get rich, please share the wealth.
Right.
But I think that would be that idea though of that reminder of like, don't get too comfortable, because remember where you are, where you came from, where what is real, and also what is a completely fabricated construct that we have shared belief in.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Which can be, take that to the extreme you want, but we build these things up like, we have to participate in this. This is part of our daily life. And then when someone gives you the permission to decouple that by, again, a power outage that's not in your control, or some other, event or something, suddenly you have that sort of like breath of fresh air, if you will, assuming you're not panicked.
Right, yes.
Because of course, while I say these things, it's not lost on me, right, that thankfully they have lots of backup things for people in hospital and all these.
Yes,
I mean, there are things that are life or death situations that require power, obviously.
Yep.
But just speaking more broadly, when it's a temporary thing, but that the freedom that gave.
I know, yeah. But it brings back our humanity, which is actually something I'm writing about at the moment. Understanding sort of what it means to be human in a technologically complex world, and how you find that core of humanity.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is not something that's in my wheelhouse, but something that I've been increasingly sort of paying more attention to, is this idea too of, are these advancements and sort of innovations in technologies, artificial intelligence as one of them, but not the only one. A lot of sort of alarm bells have been going off by people saying that it's pushing people into a isolated existence.
Right. Yes.
Right. Yeah. That these technological mediums or entertainment or distractions, however you want to frame it, that through the increasing digitalization of our human activities, that we're actually isolating ourselves from the different rings of community. That could be your family, that could be your friends, that could be your
and because
neighborhood.
It's easy. It's the slippery slope. It's easier to go down the slope than climb up the slope.
Yeah. Yep. And I do wonder, as again we think about the unintended consequences perhaps of technological innovation, right? What's the balance? What's the counterweight?
I know. And of course it's complex. So I think it's amusing. We're sitting here talking about this need to decouple from technology just after you've talked about taking the Apple Vision Pro on a plane and the glorious ability to use it. Yeah. But it actually shows it is not black and white.
Yeah.
There are ways that we need to think about leveraging technology because it does change what we can do in incredibly positive ways at the same time as working out how to stay true to our humanity and what it means to be part of a community and have those very human connections with others.
Yeah.
And take things slow.
Yeah. Well, I think that, there's been movements, right, of like mindfulness and there's been these movements, but I think again, as we turn that lens the other way around and investigate what does it mean to be human, because this is a thread that we talk about, I think a lot. And I believe it's because it's also a very important and pervasive conversation is, what are we gaining, but also by that same token,
what are we losing?
Are we losing?
Yep.
And I don't think the goal is to lose the thread here, right? The goal is not to, at least broadly, maybe individually, someone's like, I would like to become a robot or something.
Right. Yes.
That's not the goal. But how do we make sure that we don't lose so much that we start to have, this idea of like the only way we can feel human is by a act of nature and a power outage or these things
right. Sort of an enforced reset. But you bring this back to the whole idea of thinking about futures and studying futures and the conference you went to.
Yeah.
To most people, they don't have the training or the luxury of thinking about that. You deal with what is in front of you. And if you're living a life where you're dealing with what is in front of you or embracing what is in front of you, it means that anything that comes into your pathway, you just absorb. So all of the electronics, all of the technologies, all the affordances, you just absorb them into your life, but you have no ability of sort of navigating or discerning them. The only way you can is if you have the ability to think several steps forward and think about the sorts of future that you want to be part of. And only then can you actually make discerning decisions about what you absorb, what you don't, or how you absorb it. It's actually like going back several episodes now with you talking about your discipline where you desperately want something new. You give yourself a bit of space.
Yeah.
That is futures thinking. You don't just sort of absorb everything that comes your way. Say, I want, and you have it.
Well, and I think there's something to that too, right? Like it's this sort of add-on effect of the increasing, right? This idea of as our digital lives increase, right? The complexity increases, the speed increases in terms of how you're handling all these signals coming at you like crazy. When you're in a state like that, where you're sort of in this sort of prolonged state of like hyper awareness, you're dealing with all these things. You don't have the cognitive luxury to literally. I mean, in some ways, you might wonder too, like, is that unintended or is it intentional? And probably the answer is a very nuanced. In some situations, yes, and some no.
Companies vying for your attention.
Oh, sure. Yes. And when you're constantly in this mode of I must consume, in when I mean consume, I mean I must read this thing, I must do this thing, I must reply to this thing, pull out my phone. When you're constantly in this like almost like an agitated state, you don't have the ability to slow down and think deeply about wait a minute, because you're just constantly reacting. Right? You're just reacting to your environment as opposed to being intentional about it and really thinking about like, why am I spending time doing this? Should I be?
Podcasts especially. But yes, I mean, and of course, but the crazy thing is so many people talk about this, but there are so few ways forward. So you look at sort of current concerns around social media and kids and phone use and saying we've got to work out how to decouple them from those so they can just be kids. Or you look at the rise in interest around mindfulness, a way of decoupling. And I've got to think, I mean, I'm not a great mindful person. I'm obviously a very shallow person. But I do really value the ability to kick about and do nothing or read a book or lounge by the pool or go for a walk or stuff like that. To me, it's actually incredibly important doing stuff where you don't have to feel guilty about not being productive.
100%. I mean, that comes back to that idea that philosophy of Nixon, right? And again, for people if you've missed that episode, we did one on that, but essentially Nixon is a Dutch sort of mindfulness philosophy, which is basically the art of doing nothing, intentionally finding the space to just be.
Yes.
Be at rest, be at calm.
Yep.
How you do that's up to the individual because we all do things differently. But I think that, again, when we think about the bigger picture, when we think about it from a futures perspective, we want to get to a preferable future where the individual, if you're thinking from yourself, that you are flourishing, from a societal perspective where we're all flourishing, from a humanity perspective where hopefully we're better off, right? And we want to get there. But that, as you mentioned, I think that's exactly right on, is it takes a lot of deep and careful thought to think about, so this new thing happens. Before I just rush ahead and just do it because I'm reacting, what are the benefits? What are the unintended consequences? Who is advantaged? Who is disadvantaged? That takes thought. That takes care.
And it takes both discipline and humility, because it means rather than just rushing forwards, if we were technical, we'd talk about reflexivity. You think about who you are, where you are, what you're doing, what the future looks like, and how you can actually sort of modulate that.
Yeah, and what is your place, and where do you want your place to be?
Right.
And I think, again, when you have this inability to slow down and have that intentionality, right, you run the risk of just always living in this accelerated state of reaction. When you don't think about those things, and then next thing you know, you're like, how did we get here?
Yep. And of course, the flip side of that is, this is nothing about getting rid of technology. But it's about,
not at all.
I hate to say I'm going to say this, but it's about using technology mindfully. There's got to be a better phrase there, but it's about thinking about how you really extract true value from the technologies we have. And by value there, I mean the stuff that makes us more than we are individually and personally and as part of our communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And these questions don't have single word answers. Right. Yes, I think oftentimes we again, because we don't have time to think about them in many ways, we want yes or no, just tell me, is it good or is it bad? Right. And it's like the answers are never that clear.
I'm not sure even people ask that. They just ask how fast, how much,
fast, how should
big?
I? Yes. Well, you had mentioned too, something that I hear a lot because, I have small kids. And, you hear a lot about, again, whether it be social media or other technologies, it's like, we should limit their, we see potentially negative correlations of these things. Therefore, we should not let them do these things. But then you're like, then they're going to miss out, and then they're not going to have the skills needed. So there's always this. It's never cut and dry. And it's often really digging into what those are, understanding how it's impacting people that aren't you, people who are you, and making those thoughtful sort of decisions about where you want to go. And this is part of the challenge, right? So when we talk about, futures work or strategic foresight, people will sometimes make the conflation that we're talking about predicting the future, which is the absolute not what that is. But what it really is understanding and being mindful of these signals, these trends, these drivers, to try to make sense of the uncertainty, to be best prepared to handle these things that are coming that you can't always predict or foresee.
So here's a loaded question for you. Having just got back from this conference, do you think futures thinking and being a futurist is a profession for a few, or do you think everybody ought to be doing this? I've sort of teed you up there.
Yeah, I've got a good answer for this one. Well, I think it's good. I'll leave it to the listeners to decide if they think it's good. And I forget, I can steal a line, which I can't remember who said it. So I'm going to try to paraphrase it so it's not a direct ripoff. It's something that there shouldn't, I think the line was, the world doesn't need more futurists. The world needs everyone to engage in futures.
Yes.
Right? So what I would say by that is, if we have a global industry, so by the time I return to the earth and all is done, if we have just a sector, an ivory tower, or a sector of employee that are people who have a badge that says futurist, we failed.
Okay.
Yes. That's my opinion. What I hope to see over time is, especially in the United States, for example, as a major player in the global economy and all this kind of stuff, and then also around the world, is a proliferation of futures thinking
Right.
and futures skill sets and mindsets that becomes woven into the fabric of every profession, every way of, it's not about like, I'm a futurist. It's like, no, you can be an electrician who employs futures thinking to make their work and their lives and their industry and their whatever better. Same as bankers or people who become CEOs or
so it's another skill set.
Yeah,
yes.
It's another
or a way of thinking. Yes,
it's a way of thinking that allows. And we don't have the time. Looking at the clock, we don't have the time to launch into this now. But we should come back and explore, because one of the things that is so powerful about futures thinking is that it is something that you can practice as an individual in your own life. It's something you can practice professionally. You can practice it. I mean, at any tier and level of existence, you can essentially practice these.
And it's funny you should say that. So we ought to get a very good friend of mine, Brian David Johnson.
Oh, yes.
Very well-known futurist.
Yes,
and
prolific
I think he would say exactly the same. It's a way of thinking that everybody can benefit from.
Yeah, 100%. And in the thing that the benefit of it too is not just, again, if you're thinking like, oh, I'll tack on futures thinking and I'll be able to predict the next big stock market thing or whatever, like that's not what it is. But if you think about it, even just from a professional perspective, whatever your role is, right? Whether you're in education and in healthcare and government and business, if you start bringing in some of the skill sets and mindsets of futures thinking, what you will do is prepare whatever your context is for resiliency in the face of the uncertainty that is increasing.
Right. Without doubt.
I mean, I think a friend of ours, Christy, had shared a conference I was at a long time ago. I scared this entire room of people by they weren't ready for this doom and gloom thing. But the point is not about doom and gloom of innovation and things running out of control or black swan events or all these other kind of things. It was really about understanding that the best way to prepare for the future is to prepare for uncertainty.
Yes.
And that uncertainty you can see now with the innovations that we have across, especially in the technology sector, are increasing.
Right.
They're incredible. There's an acronym that I've never been a fan of because I think it sounds funny, called VUCA. And it's like velocity, uncertainty, change.
So
and
I've got one of those on my foot.
Yeah. I stepped in some, but there's this recognition and people who talk around, the name's starting to change a little bit now, but I think, 10 years ago it was coined as the fourth industrial revolution, right?
Yep.
But some of the markers of that is that we have, and we talk about lots of these markers, right? The increase and the convergence of these technological innovations and disruptions. The speed at which this is happening faster, and the velocity is increasing.
Yep.
And that brings more uncertainty.
So, and actually, sort of to take it back to that blackout, because this is a perfect example. I mean, the blackout as the results of a complex system where the slightest thing can just throw it into an unexpected state. So we know for sure that the world is becoming more complex with the technologies we develop, with the networks they're part of, with the social systems, with the political systems. So we're going to see more and more of these unexpected events, not just blackouts, but things that it's even very hard to envision. We can't necessarily prepare for them, so we have a contingency plan with everything. But what we can do is develop that agility to understand that these things are going to happen and to respond really rapidly. But you can only do that with this type of thinking about the future. Yep. If you just put the blinkers on and say, let's just go fast, and if something happens, I'm sure we'll work out what to do. We'll find out that actually we can't in some places. Yeah.
No, that's a great way of setting that up, because, if you think about it, right, like it's that preparedness for the uncertainty that makes you agile.
Yes.
Right. So that when these things happen, you're not just reacting from like a sports metaphor, right? You're not reacting from like the back foot, that you're ready for these things and depending on the level, right? It can be awareness. It can say like, okay, whatever your business is, I'm struggling to think of an example because I'm not a business person, but I'm like, if I sell Modem Futura t-shirts or whatever, you think about this like, okay, if there's future regulation that might say, make the cost of my t-shirts double or triple, right? I don't know if that's going to happen, but what if it does? how do I respond to that?
Yes.
How do I think about it? What does that mean? Do I need to change? So,
or I'll give you another example. And this actually goes back to work I've done over the years around this concept of risk innovation.
Yeah,
what happens if you're in the business of selling Modem Futura t-shirts and you design the logo in a way that is going to deeply offend some people?
Yeah, right.
And you don't think about that, and you suddenly discover not only have you got no market, but you've got people with their metaphorical pitchforks on your doorstep.
Right. You may have just You may have just unintentionally
just because you didn't think about what you were doing.
You may have just unintentionally insulted an entire culture.
Right. That's right. Yes.
But yeah, and it's so regardless of kind of like what the industry is, you can have different levels of preparedness for that. Where you can, all the way through, if this comes true, we already know how we're going to pivot or what we need, or at least we have a way of thinking we need to go in this direction. And you can also, you can see, again, there's a long line of companies that have been good examples of this. Nintendo, which people know as a video game company, is one of the best corporate examples of of a company that has engaged in essentially this futures thinking practice for going back more than 100 years.
Right.
That's a lot of people, myself included. When I was a kid, I had no idea Nintendo was around for that long. Right. They were a card game.
I was going to say, I was trying to imagine what a Nintendo would be like 100 years ago, 1925.
Yeah, no. The Nintendo Corporation originally was like playing cards, but over
the wooden joysticks.
That would be kind of fun, actually. But I'm just seeing like Mario as like marionette puppets or something.
I'm seeing the Rube Goldberg machine.
throwing shells at people. Right. But that's a company that over a century has very intentionally always hedged and looked at what is this new technological device? How could we use that? And then there's lots of companies that you can use as the contrary to that. One that's always a fun one, or it used to be anyway, was BlackBerry. Right? They were so set. They're like, there's no way nobody is going to want a phone that doesn't have a physical keyboard on.
Right.
And then the joke would always be like, all right, everyone pull out your BlackBerries, right? And of course, no one has them because they doubled down and they rode themselves into extinction, essentially.
That's right. Yes.
Because they weren't prepared for this market shift of their entire customer base, saying we want this new type of device.
Yes.
They were not prepared. They couldn't catch up. Too late, too little, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But that's really the idea. A lot of this is, again, regardless of what you're doing, even personally, you might be thinking, I've got a goal that I'm going towards, but what are these things that either are in your control, that are out of your control, that could happen, that might either get you there quicker or prevent you from getting there at all? And being able to think about these in a way that reduces stress. There's a term that we like to kick around as a benefit, that it reduces future shock. Which future shock is, as you might imagine, is this concept of you arrive at a future that you didn't want or didn't ask for, and you're like,
you're not prepared.
What do I do? Right. And it reduces that because you're like, okay, I understand. I see how this goes. And it's valuable. I think my wife can probably attest to that. There often she'd be like, why wouldn't you just make the decision on this? I'm like, you don't understand. I'm thinking about 100 things here.
But the other thing I think which is really important here, before we sort of begin to wrap this up, and let's see whether we can do this without using plain metaphors.
I was just going to say, we got to circle the airport, man.
No. But I think too often people think about sort of futures thinking and they just think about it in terms of the technology. So for instance, with AI and with adoption of AI systems, people think, how do we go faster or ahead of the competition with the AI we use? How do we get better AI? How do we incorporate it better? How can we advertise the fact that we are the number one user of AI in this situation? They think about that as futures thinking. What they forget about is the human and the social element. Yeah. And as soon as you just think about the technology rather than people, you will fail. Because that complexity comes in how people interact with the technology and what is at the core of being human to them, and how technology either threatens that or enhances it or changes it. And to me, this is at the core of this. You cannot be a futures thinker if you don't fundamentally understand the nature of humans, human behavior, humanity and society, and how that intersects with these technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I would add to that to kind of wrap to wrap up is, and also maybe we'll put a whatever you want to call it, a stake in the sand or whatever for later, because and I think I may have said this before, but coming back to also understanding what megatrends are, because so along with that is the human element is 100% crucial. One of the challenges, again, people think about with futures is, well, I can't, and they're right in this, is you can't be an expert in everything. Right. But we use this, there's a tool that we'll also use, which is like, you can call it like a megatrend tool, a survey tool or something. They're usually represented in a wheel, like a circular wheel perspective. But the idea is, and these are all sort of, so if you imagine like a pie chart or a pizza, right? And each wedge of this is one of these different megatrends. And megatrends are as their name suggests, they're large trends that are things that are likely to kind of come to some kind of fruition within 10, 15 years or so. These are big shifts, right? So climate change, for example, is a megatrend. But the point of them is, yes, you could be, and your industry, your focus might be in one of those. It might be part of one of those pie slices of pizza pie. But that's not the point. The point is as you're engaging in these futures thinking is to be aware of all of these different things. Because the reason it's usually displayed as a model in like a circular or a wheel perspective is to demonstrate that they're all interconnected. That nothing happens in isolation. If your focus is on AI and tech, that's great. But you also need to be able to scan the horizon to see, like, for example, how are changes in a geopolitical space impact technology and AI? How is technology and AI impacting healthcare, education, whatever else. And you can make your own, like there's lots of places that put out these beautiful, like Copenhagen Institute is one of them, that the World Economic Forum is another that put out these beautiful megatrend sort of tools that people can use, but you can also make your own. I mean, if you do enough thinking. But the point of those tools is, as you're thinking about your thing, is to make sure that you understand. Now, you can't be an expert in all these. You just don't. Humans, we don't have enough time for this yet.
That's what AI is for.
AI can help. It can help. It can, because you can certainly say, like,
and actually, I'm serious.
Give me the rundown.
That is one of the superpowers of using even the current batch of AI.
You still won't be the expert, but you can get a expert with air quotes. You can get an expert synopsis of that whole area or whatever. But the point of it is to start getting in the practice of when your focus might be on your thing. But the point is, before you can think about how that little thing that's just yours can be successful or not, you need to consider the holistic, all these things that are happening around it. And as you mentioned, I think it's a beautiful way to kind of wrap this thing up and end it, is like the within all of that, I think the piece that maybe strikes, so if you think about putting a big stick right through the center of your pizza, that's the human element, right? That's besides
connects
all
everything.
Connects everything. Because that's, when we're talking about how we as people thrive in a future or a future state, we're ultimately talking about what does it mean to be human, and how and what decisions do we make today can influence where we want to go and where we want to end up, and hopefully in a place of human flourishing.
That sounds like a great place to finish.
Let's
time to take the metaphorical Apple Vision Pro off.
Oh my!
Come back to reality.
I've got the goggle lines. My face is a little sweaty. I'm a little disoriented, but I have a smile on my face. Good. Right? That's kind of sums it up there. Well, this I love these conversations because we start with a trip to Lisbon and we end up going deep into futures thinking, and that's the beauty of it. So thank you, and I'll stuff as much as I can in the show notes. As well, and just I'll circle back just to the call again. We love hearing from you. So if you would like to leave us a note please again, you can get a hold of us through email, through LinkedIn, through lots of mechanisms. And again, those are all linked in our show notes, so you can grab those and have a look. And also, search for us, see if where we show up on the ratings, and try to boost those. Let's do it. Let's get into that top 10. I want
top 10. Yes, remember top 10. Help us get there.
Fantastic.
Until next time.
Next time. We'll see you then. Thanks for joining us on Modem Futura.
We'll see you.
Demodulating signal.
Modem Futura is a production of the Future of Being Human initiative at Arizona State University. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. To learn more about the Future of Being Human initiative and all of our other projects, please visit us on the web at futureofbeinghuman.asu.edu.
End transmission.